Guys, Chris is here again, and in this video I want to talk about how you should listen to Japanese even when you don't understand, and how do you stop translating in your head. So I've come up with a method I kind of stumbled on that I want to share today. So this video is for those of you who you might be in the early stages and you're listening and you don't really understand anything and you're like, is anything happening? I'm listening to all these podcasts and it's just kind of going in one ear and out the other and I don't really get anything, maybe the odd word here and there. I started listening in this way, and it might be a nuanced thing. You might be already doing it, but I wasn't doing it, and maybe people out there had been doing the same thing as me. So I want to go through how I'm actually listening. So I stumbled across this. I was going down some YouTube rabbit hole and I ended up on this freestyle rap guy's channel, and he's like good. He like asks people to give him words and he'll rap, and he'll include all the words in his rap, and he's just amazing. And I went down that rabbit hole of like, how do people do that? How do freestyle rappers, like straight off the top of their head while continuing to talk at quite a fast rate, how do they do it? Like, it's really impressive, especially those who are very good at it. And I came across this one guy and he was like teaching here. There was like a tutorial of how to get into freestyle rap. And he said what most people do is they start talking or rapping and they will think of a word and then they'll quickly try to think of a word to rhyme with it, okay? And he's like, that's not actually what you're supposed to do. He said what that does is it creates a degree of panic in your head and you start trying to rush at the last second in order to get that word that rhymes with the one that you just said. Now what he said he does instead is sort of, he thinks ahead of the word he wants to rhyme with, and then before he gets to that, he quickly thinks of a sentence before that that'll rhyme with the thing that he's initially come up with. It sounds kind of weird, right? So it's a very subtle difference. Rather than be like, you know, I went to the park and I saw a big dog, and then he's like, okay, what rhymes with dog? He's going, okay, the sentence is I went to the park and I saw a big dog, but then he thinks of something to say before that. Weird. Now, I'm not a freestyle rap expert, so any of you freestyles out there, it might have just been his method. But it got me thinking about how the mind works and why he might do things that way, and I've been able to apply it to Japanese. And the way I applied it is that when I first started listening to podcasts, this is how I listened. I would listen like I'm kind of like I'm like a submarine, like scanning for words, right? And I would focus on the first word of the sentence. So whenever I heard someone talk, they start talking, and I'd usually get the first word because it's usually like a pronoun actually, or like a noun, and it's easy to like grasp that first word because you're kind of ready for it and you grasp it, and then you try to grasp the next word and the next word, and then it trails off. And the reason for that is when you understand that word, maybe at the beginning of the sentence where your focus is, you'll have like a mini celebration in your head, or you'll translate it in your head and you won't be able to really stop yourself. So for example, if someone's going like watashi, and then you'll be like, oh, it means I. And even if you don't want to do it and you're trying not to do it, that's kind of the way you're listening. You're scanning for the words. You'll hear the first couple of words and you'll be like, oh, do I know any of those? Or I do know that one. And then by the time in those milliseconds of like hearing something you know, the rest of the sentence is kind of trailed off. And then you have to pick up, you know, beyond all the rest of that sentence that you just missed. And that's how I was listening, if I'm honest with myself. I was listening to words, and then you hear a word that you know, and you can't help but spend 1 millisecond to either be like yes or translate, right? I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but that's kind of how I listen. What I've started doing now is not being like the submarine with the radar trying to pick up words. What I'm doing now is I'm more like a fishing boat that's dragging a net behind it. Or I'm like a cursor at the end of a word processor when you're typing away and it's got the cursor. And the way I'm stopping myself from translating or having mini celebrations and even just being more focused is no matter what, to track the last word. So I'm basically last word tracking. And you might be like, well, what if there's no last word? What if they just keep talking? And it's like, well, exactly. If they keep talking, then the last word is gonna continue to be the next word is going to be the last word. So to test that, you need to perhaps listen to someone talking and then pause it and be like, did I hear the last thing that they said? Okay, so you're tracking the last word. And the reason I use the analogy of the fishing boat is that the boat's at the front. And what will happen is, with every pause or break in the talking, your brain has taken in the other words subconsciously. So rather than have that mini celebration when you hear something and then you lose the rest of the sentence, you're always tracking the last word. And then when there's a pause, you kind of realize what you understood before the point you're focused on now, subconsciously. So you're understanding what was said, you've kept up with the sentence, and the focus on the listening is much more productive, and it feels better because you're not losing anything. So I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. Maybe I should do an example. All right, so this is a story called, this is Simple Japanese Listening with Meg, and this is called, you can find this on Spotify. Okay. Okay.
その郵便局にとても親切な女の人がいました。
Right, so
恵子さんです。恵子さんはいつも笑顔でお客さんと。
So if I was just listening for words that I knew, I heard this like eigo, right? Let's go back.
の人がいました。恵子さんです。恵子さんはいつも。
Even the girl's name, Keiko-san. Now this is a very slow podcast, but let's say I'm like, oh, she's talking about someone called Keiko.
笑顔でお客さんと話します。
Right? And then I'm like, I hear that, and then I'm like, oh, what was the rest of the thing that she just said? And like I totally missed it. Whereas if I'm tracking the last word,
と話します。の人がいました。恵子さんです。恵子さんはいつも笑顔でお客さんと話します。
Okay, then I'm like on the last word. I know the last word there was hanashimasu, which is to speak. And then I'm like, okay, let me think back. Okay, there was keiko, eigo, and then there was a word that I didn't understand, and then hanashimasu. So I did actually collect in the fishing net all the words. I just wasn't thinking about them. I was focused on that last word. But then if I pause it and I think back, then I know I have more of the sentence in my head, right? So it's a better way to listen, is that last word tracking. Let's go on a bit more.
その郵便局に。
So arohi, I don't know what that means. Do I? I don't think I do. So even when I don't know what the word means, I might then start be like, oh, what's that word? Do I know? Like just as I literally just did. I was like, do I know that word? Now let's say I did that in real time and I didn't pause it.
ある日、
And then I'm like, arohi.
その郵便局に一匹の。
So I'm thinking, oh, do I know that? And then I've missed the whole other sentence. Now if I don't focus on that, if I just let it go, because if you don't know it, you don't know it. So there's no point in stopping and seeing if you do know it. I mean, because if you don't know it, you might know it after 30 seconds of racking your brain, but then that's not really knowing it. So you may as well put that in the I don't know it pile.
話します。
I'm going to track the last word.
日、その郵便局に一匹の猫が入ってきました。
Okay.
猫。
So now if I think back, I realize what I knew in the sentence, even though, and I didn't have that mini celebration. I waited, and then when it stopped, I'm like, yeah, I got like a few words there, right? So it's tracking the last word like a cursor, following the last letter as it's being typed or spoken, like the fishing boat, grabbing all the other words in the net. You don't drag a fishing net and start like counting fish when it's still moving, which is what I was doing before. So it's like you're moving away from scanning and thinking of the sentence as just a blob and you're looking for words in the blob, to focusing on that last word and allowing your subconscious to pick up what you know and also recognize what you don't know. Okay, and I just think it's a better way to listen. And I've made a list here of why I think it's better. It stops you from translating in your head straight away because you're giving your mind another focus, which is to track the last word. And then you're learning inadvertently, subconsciously. You'll focus on words better. Your brain will, again, inadvertently pick up the words between the first word and the last word, which is the word you're tracking. You get better with long sentences, I think, because you're also picking up on particles. You'd be like, wa, de, ni. You'll notice sometimes people really do pause on those. You get better at breaking up sentences. You get better at hearing patterns of speech and particle placement, which is what I just said, but also verb placement. I think this is especially good for Japanese because the verb is usually at the end, and then it gets you used to hearing different verb endings as well. So think about it, if the verb endings is one of the most, is one of the hardest things to kind of hear for in Japanese, like passive or volitional verb endings, you're missing a lot of those if you're only understanding the first part of the sentence, right? If you're like intently listening to the first part and trying to keep up rather than be ahead of it, you're barely hearing the end of sentences, right? So that means you're barely hearing verb endings. Whereas if you're tracking the last word, you're hearing them a lot. I also believe it improves your ability to predict as well in the long term. I think one of the reasons we're able to listen so quickly when we do have a grasp of a language is because we do have that predictive ability. Like when you hear something so many times, your brain is prone to picking up on patterns. You can probably guess what someone is going to say. And I remember one interview I've seen with Katsumoto, who created AJATT. He was being interviewed by someone and he's like, yeah, we have predictive listening ability. So for example, his example is, don't steal my lucky, and it's like, oh, you know that the next word is charms even though he hasn't said it. So try that mental shift, try to shift your listening to not just having mini celebrations every time you hear a word, which again is probably you translating it and going, and for a split second going, a part of your brain going, I got it, and just track the last word, and you'll automatically get the words you know and don't know. And it might even help you for the ones you don't know. You'll be like, oh, I'm gonna put that in my Anki deck. So yeah, just a little mental model, you could say, that I kind of stumbled across, and that's how now I'm listening. Especially if it's content that I know I don't really understand a lot of it, I find that it's a better way to listen because because I'm focused on that last word all the time, it stops me from putting focus on translating words. So I hope that's helpful. I hope it makes sense. Last word tracking, track that last word, and it stops you from having mini celebrations when you realize you know the word that was just spoken in English. All right, hope that helps anyone out there. And if you have any questions, drop them down below and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.